You're living in the year 1200. You're a merchant in Baghdad, one of the wealthiest cities on earth. Life is good, trade is booming. Your biggest worry is probably whether the caravan from China will arrive on time. But then, rumors start spreading from the east. Whispers of horsemen who appear like ghosts on the horizon, who can shoot arrows with deadly precision while riding at full gallop, who conquer entire kingdoms in months, not years. You dismiss these stories as exaggerated tales from nervous traders. 20 years later, your city lies in ruins. Your entire world has been reshaped by a man whose name will echo through history. Genghis Khan. And this isn't just the story of one conqueror, it's the story of how a collection of nomadic tribes created the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from Korea to Hungary, from Siberia to Vietnam. Today, we're diving deep into the complete history of the Mongol Empire, from its humble beginnings on the steppes of Mongolia to its dramatic rise, spectacular conquests, and eventual fragmentation. This is a story that will challenge everything you think you know about medieval warfare, diplomacy, and empire building. So, grab a cup of kumis, that's fermented mare's milk, by the way, and let's ride into one of history's most extraordinary tales.
To understand the Mongol Empire, we first need to understand where it came from. Imagine the Mongolian steppes in the 12th century, vast grasslands stretching endlessly under an enormous sky, where the horizon seems to go on forever. This isn't farmland. You can't plant crops here and expect them to survive the harsh winters and unpredictable rainfall. Instead, this land shaped a unique way of life. The Mongols were nomads, and think of nomadism like this. If farmers are like trees, putting down deep roots in one place, then nomads are like rivers, always moving, always adapting to the landscape around them. Mongol society revolved entirely around livestock: horses, cattle, sheep, and goats. These animals weren't just property, they were the foundation of everything. Horses provided mobility and military power. Sheep gave wool for clothing and felt for their portable homes called gurs or yurts. Cattle provided milk, meat, and leather. Every animal had multiple uses and nothing was wasted. But here's the crucial part. This lifestyle created incredibly hardy, adaptable people. Mongol children learned to ride before they could properly walk. They grew up in a world where survival depended on reading the weather, understanding animal behavior, and being able to pack up your entire life and move it hundreds of miles at a moment's notice. The social structure was tribal, and these tribes were constantly shifting alliances, fighting over pasture rights, stealing each other's livestock, and engaging in the kind of low-level warfare that would have prepared them perfectly for what was to come. It was like a centuries-long military training program, except nobody knew they were preparing for world conquest. The Mongols also had something that would prove crucial later. They were remarkably tolerant of different beliefs and practices. When you're a nomad, you encounter many different peoples, and survival often depends on being able to adapt and learn from others rather than trying to force everyone to be like you. Now, into this world of competing tribes and endless grasslands, a boy was born around 1162. His name was Temujin, and according to legend, he was born with a blood clot in his fist, which Mongol shamans interpreted as a sign that he would become a great warrior. But Temujin's early life reads more like a survival story than the biography of a future world conqueror. His father, Yesuge, was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was just 9 years old. This left his family, his mother Hoylan, Temujin, and his siblings, essentially outcasts on the steppes. Think about this situation. In Mongol society, your survival depended on tribal protection. Without a strong male leader, Temujin's family was left to fend for themselves in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They lived on wild plants, fish, and whatever small game they could catch. Hoylan, Temujin's mother, kept the family together through sheer force of will. But this hardship forged something remarkable in young Temujin. He learned that survival meant building alliances, that loyalty had to be earned rather than inherited, and that sometimes you had to be utterly ruthless to protect those you cared about. These weren't lessons you'd learn in a palace. They were carved into his soul by hunger, cold, and constant danger. The turning point came when Temujin was captured by a rival tribe and escaped with the help of a sympathetic guard. This experience taught him two crucial lessons. Mercy could be a powerful tool for building loyalty, and no situation was hopeless if you kept your wits about you. As he grew older, Temujin began building a following. But here's what made him different from other tribal leaders. He promoted people based on merit rather than birth. If you were loyal and capable, it didn't matter if you came from a noble family or were a former enemy, you could rise in Temujin's ranks. This was revolutionary. Most societies at this time were rigidly hierarchical, but Temujin created what we might today call a meritocracy, where your value was determined by what you could contribute, not who your father was. By his 20s, Temujin was leading a growing coalition of tribes. He formed a crucial alliance with Jamuka, his childhood friend who had become a rival leader.
The process of uniting the Mongol tribes was like trying to herd cats, if cats were armed warriors who'd been feuding with each other for generations. But Temujin had several advantages that his rivals lacked. First, his military innovations. Traditional steppe warfare involved lots of individual heroics and disorganized charging. Temujin organized his forces into decimal units, groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors called tumens. This might sound simple, but it created a level of coordination and discipline that was unprecedented on the steppes. Imagine trying to coordinate an attack with 20,000 horsemen who were used to fighting as individuals. It would be chaos. But with the decimal system, commands could flow down through clear chains of command, allowing for complex tactical maneuvers that gave Temujin's forces a huge advantage. Second, his psychological warfare. Temujin understood that winning battles was often less important than winning minds. He offered generous terms to those who surrendered. They could keep their positions, their families would be protected, and capable warriors could even rise to positions of authority in his army. But to those who resisted, he showed no mercy whatsoever. This created a powerful incentive structure: submit and prosper, or resist and face annihilation. Word spread quickly across the steppes, and many tribes decided it was better to join the growing coalition than to fight it. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Dalan Baljit, where Temujin faced off against his former friend Jamuka in what was essentially a civil war for control of the Mongol tribes. The battle itself was brutal and indecisive, but its aftermath revealed Temujin's genius for building loyalty. After the battle, many of Jamuka's own followers began defecting to Temujin. Why? Because while Jamuka executed prisoners and ruled through fear, Temujin incorporated defeated enemies into his army and rewarded competence over birth status. People began to see that Temujin's vision offered something new, a chance to be part of something larger than their individual tribes. The final unification took years of careful alliance building, strategic marriages, and yes, quite a bit of warfare. But by 1206, something unprecedented had happened. The fractured tribes of the Mongolian steppes had been united under a single leader. At a great assembly called a Kurultai, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, which probably means universal ruler or ruler of all. At this moment,
a 44-year-old former outcast became the leader of what would soon become the most powerful military force on Earth. But here's what's remarkable. Genghis Khan wasn't content to just rule the steppes. He had a vision that extended far beyond the grasslands of Mongolia. He wanted to conquer the world. Before we dive into the conquests, we need to understand what made the Mongol military so devastatingly effective. This wasn't just about having tough warriors. Lots of societies had tough warriors. This was about creating a military system that could adapt to any situation and defeat any enemy. Let's start with the horses. Each Mongol warrior traveled with 3 to 5 horses, rotating between them to ensure the mounts stayed fresh. This meant Mongol armies could cover distances that seemed impossible to their enemies. While European armies might march 10 to 15 miles a day, Mongol forces could cover 60 miles or more. But speed was just the beginning. Mongol cavalry could fight in ways that seemed almost supernatural to their opponents. They could shoot arrows with deadly accuracy while riding at full gallop, both forward and backward. The famous Parthian shot, turning in the saddle to fire at pursuers while retreating, was a standard Mongol tactic. Think of Mongol warfare like this. If traditional medieval armies were like chess, where pieces moved in predictable patterns, then Mongol warfare was like three-dimensional chess played at high speed. They could appear where you didn't expect them, attack from multiple directions simultaneously, and disappear before you could organize a counterattack. Their composite bows were technological marvels, more accurate and powerful than most weapons of the time. A Mongol archer could kill an armored knight at 500 yards, far beyond the range of crossbows or early firearms. But the real secret weapon was organization and communication. The Mongols developed a sophisticated intelligence network and communication system using riders who could cover vast distances quickly. They knew more about their enemies than their enemies knew about them. They also pioneered psychological warfare on an industrial scale. Cities that surrendered were treated well and incorporated into the empire. Cities that resisted faced complete destruction, with survivors often forced to march ahead of the Mongol armies as human shields in the next siege. Word of these tactics spread faster than the armies themselves, and many cities surrendered without a fight rather than face annihilation. Perhaps most importantly, the Mongols were adaptable. When they encountered siege warfare in China, they incorporated Chinese engineers and siege technology. When they fought in the Middle East, they learned from Muslim military tactics. They weren't just conquerors, they were the ultimate military innovators. Genghis Khan's first major target was the Western Xia Kingdom, but his real prize was the Jin dynasty that controlled northern China. This wasn't just about conquest, it was about proving that the nomadic Mongols could defeat the most advanced civilization in the world. China in the early 13th century was arguably the most sophisticated society on Earth. They had gunpowder, advanced metallurgy, complex administrative systems, and massive fortified cities. From a Chinese perspective, the Mongols were just another group of barbarians from the north, a nuisance to be managed, not a serious threat. This attitude was their first mistake. The Mongol invasion of China reads like a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. The Jin dynasty expected traditional nomadic tactics, raids, hit-and-run attacks, maybe some tribute demands. Instead, they faced a systematic campaign of conquest unlike anything they had seen before. Genghis Khan's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. First, isolate your target by dealing with their allies. The Mongols systematically defeated the Western Xia and various other northern kingdoms, eliminating potential sources of aid for the Jin. Second, turn your enemy's strengths against them. The Chinese had massive fortified cities that should have been impregnable to nomadic cavalry. But the Mongols recruited Chinese engineers who knew how to build and operate siege equipment. Suddenly, those walls weren't quite so protective. Third, use terror as a weapon. The Mongols made it clear that cities that surrendered would be spared, while those that resisted would be utterly destroyed. When Beijing, then called Zhengdu, finally fell in 1215, the destruction was so complete that, according to one account, the bones of the dead formed white mountains visible from miles away. But here's where Genghis Khan showed his true genius. He didn't just destroy. The Mongols began incorporating Chinese administrative practices, technology, and personnel into their growing empire. Chinese scholars and administrators found that they could prosper under Mongol rule if they were willing to serve their new masters. This pattern would repeat across the empire: conquer through superior military tactics, then govern by adopting and adapting the best practices of the conquered peoples. The Mongols were like a military and administrative sponge, absorbing useful techniques from every civilization they encountered. The conquest of northern China took over 20 years to complete, but it established the template for all future Mongol conquests. More importantly, it provided the Mongols with the resources, technology, and administrative expertise they would need to build a world empire.
While the conquest of China was still ongoing, Genghis Khan turned his attention west toward the Islamic world. This decision would reshape the history of the Middle East and Central Asia for centuries to come. The catalyst was the Khwarezmid Empire, which controlled much of modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. The Khwarezmid Shah, Ala ad-Din Muhammad, made what might be the worst diplomatic decision in history. Genghis Khan had actually tried to establish peaceful trade relations with the Khwarezmid Empire. He sent a trade caravan with a message proposing commercial partnerships. But the local governor, suspecting the merchants were spies, had them executed and seized their goods. When Genghis Khan sent ambassadors demanding an explanation and compensation, the Shah had one ambassador executed and sent the others back with their beards burned off, a mortal insult in diplomatic terms. This was like declaring war on a hurricane. Genghis Khan abandoned his Chinese campaign and turned the full fury of the Mongol War Machine toward the west. What followed was one of the most devastating military campaigns in human history. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmid Empire was like watching a natural disaster unfold in slow motion. City after city fell with mechanical precision. Samarkand, one of the great cities of the Islamic world, was captured in just 5 days. Bukhara was taken so quickly that its inhabitants had no time to organize resistance. But the real shock was the scale of destruction. This wasn't just military conquest, it was systematic devastation. The Mongols destroyed irrigation systems that had taken centuries to build, turning fertile agricultural areas into desert. They killed not just soldiers and rulers, but entire populations of cities that had resisted. The ancient city of Merv, which may have been the largest city in the world at the time, was completely destroyed. According to contemporary accounts, over 1 million people were killed. Whether these numbers are accurate is debated by historians, but there's no doubt that the destruction was unprecedented. The psychological impact was even greater than the physical destruction. The Islamic world had been expanding and confident for centuries. Suddenly, they faced an enemy that seemed unstoppable, that could appear anywhere, defeat any army, and destroy any city. By 1221, the Khwarezmid Empire had simply ceased to exist. An empire that had controlled territory from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf had been erased from the map in less than 3 years. The Shah died as a fugitive on an island in the Caspian Sea, and his empire was absorbed into the growing Mongol dominion. This conquest established the Mongols as a world power and opened the door for further expansion into Europe and the rest of the Islamic world. But it also marked the beginning of a pattern that would define much of the Mongol Empire's history: brilliant military success, followed by the enormous challenge of governing vast, diverse territories. While Genghis Khan was conquering Central Asia, he sent one of his most capable generals, Jebe, and about 20,000 men on what was officially a pursuit mission, but turned into one of the most remarkable military expeditions in history. This force was supposed to be chasing the fleeing Khwarezmid Shah, but they ended up conducting a reconnaissance in force that took them completely around the Caspian Sea and deep into Europe. Think of it as the ultimate military road trip, except instead of stopping at tourist attractions, they conquered kingdoms. The expedition moved through the Caucasus Mountains, defeating Georgian armies and Armenian forces. They then emerged onto the Russian steppes, where they encountered something they hadn't seen before, a coalition of Russian princes and their Kipchak Turkish allies. The Battle of Kalka River in 1223 was a preview of what Europe would face 20 years later. The Russians had numerical superiority and were fighting on their home territory. They should have won. Instead, they were completely outmaneuvered by Mongol tactics they had never encountered. The Mongols used their classic feigned retreat, drawing the Russian cavalry into pursuit, then surrounding and annihilating them. Several Russian princes were captured, and in a display of Mongol dark humor, were suffocated beneath a wooden platform while the Mongol generals held a victory feast on top of them. After this victory, the Mongol expedition simply disappeared back into the steppes. They had traveled over 8,000 miles, defeated multiple armies, and returned home with valuable intelligence about European military capabilities and political divisions. This expedition served as reconnaissance for a much larger invasion that would come later. The Mongols now knew that European armies, while brave, used tactics that were centuries out of date. They knew about the political fragmentation that would make coordinated resistance difficult. And they knew the geography and logistics of potential invasion routes. Most importantly, word of the Mongol victories spread throughout Europe, but rather than prompting serious military preparations, it was often dismissed as exaggerated tales from distant lands. Europe was about to make the same mistake that China and the Islamic world had made, underestimating the Mongols. In 1227, during a campaign against the Western Xia Kingdom, Genghis Khan died. The official cause was given as illness, though some accounts suggest he died from injuries sustained in a fall from his horse. He was about 65 years old and had spent the last 2 decades of his life in almost constant warfare. But here's what's remarkable. His death didn't destroy the empire or even slow its expansion. This was because Genghis Khan had done something that few conquerors manage. He had created institutions and systems that could function without him. Before his death, Genghis Khan had designated his third son, Ogedei, as his successor. This wasn't automatic. Mongol tradition didn't necessarily favor primogeniture, but Genghis Khan had recognized that Ogedei had the diplomatic skills and administrative ability needed to hold the empire together. The succession was managed through a Kurultai, the traditional Mongol assembly, which confirmed Ogedei as the new Great Khan in 1229. During the 2-year interregnum, the empire was managed by Tolui, Genghis Khan's youngest son, demonstrating the stability of Mongol institutions. Ogedei proved to be an inspired choice. While his father had been primarily a conqueror, Ogedei was a builder. He established Karakorum as the empire's capital, created a more sophisticated administrative system, and most importantly, he continued the expansion while also working to consolidate what had already been conquered. Under Ogedei's leadership, the Mongol Empire would reach its greatest extent. His reign would see the completion of the conquest of China, the devastating invasion of Europe, and expansion into Southeast Asia and the Middle East. But succession also revealed one of the Mongol Empire's fundamental weaknesses.
The empire was held together largely by personal loyalty to the Khan and by the momentum of continuous conquest. When that momentum slowed, or when succession disputes arose, centrifugal forces would begin pulling the empire apart. This tension between expansion and consolidation, between nomadic traditions and the requirements of governing settled populations, would define much of the empire's later history. The Mongols had proven they could conquer the world, but governing it would prove to be an entirely different challenge.